Now, the reason I'm broadcasting from home tonight is I'm caught up in a COVID situation and the COVID rules. My 10-year-old son was crook on Friday night. We tested him lunchtime Saturday. He's COVID positive. He's good now. He was crook for about 36 hours. But it means all of us, vaccinated as we are, negative as we are according to the tests, we're all stuck home here for 7 days. I think these rules are just too extreme. In a country where we've got well over 90% of the population vaccinated, where we've got medical facilities coping with the demand, plenty of resources there, as the Health Minister was just saying, these sort of rules are just too onerous. They're keeping people away from school, they're keeping people away from work, they're just dislocating our society. It's not so much the COVID infections that are dislocating society, but the rules that are being imposed around this country. Now, when you look at extremes with the rules, you can't go past Western Australia. And Western Australia at the moment is in a situation where its border is closed. So many people who left Western Australia to catch up with family and friends over Christmas, New Year, because there was that February 5 reopening date promised, inked in blood by Western Australian Premier Mark McGowan, so many of them have now been caught out, stranded interstate, because of his reversal, because he's not opening the borders next week. So some of those people are stuck interstate, others are resigned to going back to Western Australia and doing 2 weeks quarantine. Now, among them are many sports stars. There are many sports teams left Western Australia and got stuck on the East Coast because of that closed border. We've got the Western Force rugby union team stuck. We've had, of course, the Perth Scorchers won the Big Bash in Melbourne on Friday night. They're stuck here, of course. There's soccer teams, Perth Glory, the Perth Wildcats. Now, we don't know whether individuals are just going to sit it out in the east or whether some of them are going back and doing quarantine, but there are just so many people stuck in this situation in Western Australia, and it just shows how rough these rules are. Honestly, Mark McGowan and his government should not be treating his own people like this. These are people who are vaccinated, they can test negative, yet they still can't go home without 2 weeks quarantine. It's cruel and it's unnecessary. It's just silly. But it's not just Western Australia that's still got these onerous rules in place, rules that go too far. I want to show you the plea, the social media plea from a South Australian woman last week who was desperate to visit her grandma in hospital, a 95-year-old grandma in hospital. She was in all sorts of medical strife, and her granddaughter just desperately wanted to get into hospital and visit her. Have a listen.
My 95-year-old nana has been in hospital since the 1st of January with not one person that she knows being able to see her despite our best efforts. She was in hospital with COVID, which I understood we couldn't see her, and she got transferred to rehab. And now she's going in the QEH because she has a possible clot on her lung. Her heart rate is so high. She needs oxygen. She's really unwell. I've just tried my hardest to see her. I've waited for an hour and a half to be refused. I've taken her a bag of all of her favourite things, which I don't even know if it will get to her because I wanted to give it to her myself. She's 95, she has dementia, and she's old. She's fretting for her family.
Such a harrowing situation. We've seen so many of them play out across state borders over the past 2 years. That was in South Australia, a South Australian not allowed to go in and visit her dying grandmother. Sadly, the grandmother passed away over the weekend. She spent the last month of her life in hospital with no visitors. The last month of her life alone. So tragic, so unnecessary. Here's the South Australian Premier, Stephen Marshall, today.
This is another one of the tragic cases of Omicron, of the coronavirus. Obviously, our clinicians make these decisions.
Yeah, look, that's just not on from the South Australian Premier, buck passing to the clinicians at the hospitals. This is the Premier's responsibility. He and his emergency council with the Chief Medical Officer and the Police Commissioner, they set the rules, they set the tone in South Australia. For too long, it's had a zero COVID ambition. It's started to open up a bit now, but those sort of rules, they emanate from the Chief Health Officer and the Premier and the Police Commissioner. They set the tone, and the Premier ought to take responsibilities for this sort of thing because people matter. You can't save every life, especially a 95-year-old life, but you can have compassion and allow people to have the comfort of visitors, the comfort of families. It is so sad and so unnecessary, so cruel and heartless for our state governments to impose restrictions on this sort of thing. It really, really is tragic. When it comes to Western Australia, I should add that hard border is causing so many problems that some of the leading business people from Perth are relocating to the eastern states. The executive of Wesfarmers, who run Bunnings and Kmart, and also the chair of Qantas, who also happens to chair Woodside, looks like they're heading east because it's too hard to run national businesses and global businesses from Perth when you can't travel backwards and forwards into the eastern states. So they're upping stumps, moving east for the duration. See what happens. Just a shambles when we have these premiers adopting over-the-top rules.